Like that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right before we get started, we'll just ask everybody, please put your phone on silent or vibrate so we don't disturb our guest speakers today that's going to give us some vital information. So today here we have Mr. J.R. Flores, and we also have Mr. James Chacon. Ain't that how you say it? Chacon. Okay, I got to get it right, you know. Don't want to disrespect nobody. So Mr. Flores is Senior Director of Legal Counseling. He's going to talk to you guys today about, is your vendor two? Who do you really zero trust? He specializes in digital solutions for legal operations and investigations at Protivity. Protivity, oh my goodness. As a foreign examiner, he oversees digital forensic preservation and provides consulting on e-discovery and legal readiness strategies. He has been in the legal industry since 2007.
I'm old. Thank you.
We also have Mr. Chacon.
Got
He
it.
is the single director of legal consulting also with the same company. You know, he has over 22 years of experience in IT, information security, litigation, support, and forensic investigation, and representing major global enterprises. He and J.R. Flores addresses gaps between various groups handling the same data, providing insight into data lifecycle management. So let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks for you.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Mic's on, test, 1, 2. Excellent, wonderful. Well, again, thanks so much for coming out after lunch. We'd love to be the speakers right after you just ate a big meal. So we appreciate that. If you want to text anyone else, we are giving away free beer and iPads at the end of this, so please let everyone else know. So a quick little story to start us off. A few years ago, James and I were called in by one of our law firm partners here in Houston for a little problem they had. We don't work directly with implementation of IT. I have some friends from Protivity over here that actually do that. But we were actually associated with the legal counsel and helping them with some case information they had. Well, they called us and said, we can't get our case databases to come up. Could you come take a look at this? We said, okay, sure, no problem. So we went over to the office. We found their backup file servers were full. Then we noticed a law firm's name on their file servers that wasn't that law firm. Well, lo and behold, we realized that they used a third-party vendor to do all their IT systems, their VoIP, their email, their Exchange, their networks, everything. And this IT vendor didn't have a backup solution, and they were using one law firm to back up another law firm's data, to another law firm's data, to another law firm's data. So when we talk about your most prized possessions, your secret data, it's good to know who actually has your data. That gives us a little bit of intro of what we're going to talk about today. So again, my name is J.R. Flores. I'm a senior director with our practice, our legal consulting practice here in Houston with Protivity. So we are a global consulting firm. This is my boilerplate discussion real quick. None of the things that we talk about today represent our employer or where we work. This is all opinions of our own, just things we've noticed in the field. We're not here to dox or talk bad about any other consultancies or clients or services. It's just some of the things that we've seen in the field ourselves. So both James and I are from El Paso, Texas. We're both in the UT system from UTEP. We came to Houston. I came here first and said, hey man, I really need your help out here. Dragged him down to Houston, 2010. Married, going on 18 years now. I've got 5 kids. And I've been working in legal consulting since before I can remember. So it's been a long, long time. James?
I just love that he put self-professed boy genius here. This is what happens up. Slides aren't changing.
Our slides aren't changing. I forgot. We have clear. I was doing those over here. So this is also my claim to fame. When people say I'm a self-proclaimed hacker, I still hold that moniker. This is me, freshman year of high school. That was my room, very much my hacker setup back in the day.
So now what I'm saying, like I said, JR made the slides here, so I love his last point there that I just caught. But anyway, also born in El Paso, so I did meet JR at UT El Paso. And the funny story he likes to tell is we were each other's biggest competition, so we ended up working together in the end, so it's kind of awesome. Yeah, 2 kids, so I'll just kind of go over that. And I've been working in the legal industry, I guess, since 2011, but again, I've been in IT in some shape or form since the 90s, so it's actually a little bit more than 22 years. I just had to do that math.
And even though we don't work directly in cybersecurity, James is very sensitive about taking his picture. So this is the only picture we have of him. This is the closest thing we have to anything facial recognition-wise. All right. I was wanting to change over here, so I'll change over here. So a real quick table of contents, what we're talking about today, a little bit about our law firm partners, legal counsel, what that means for your organization, some of the traditional security perimeter that James will talk about. You all are probably very, very familiar with that. I'll go into depth about legal requests and what happens to most organizations when they have a legal request, either for litigation purposes, for a lawsuit, for regulatory and compliance work, for internal audit, those kind of things. Talk a little bit about solutions. We don't have a lot of good ideas. We have some ideas that we think will be good for you all to take back, and some interesting legal statistics that we found in the marketplace. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to James for a quick second.
All right, so one thing I wanted to start off with is early in my career, and actually when I started working with JR, kind of my biggest task in my job was setting up a security perimeter for the provider that I guess, I don't want to say started, but the provider we're working at. So anyway, taking that from essentially a very immature setup to obviously implementing, I guess, the full stack, perimeter. I did it again.
So talk about
this is only my second talk. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do this to get better, but let me try and get back on track. Anyway, so yes, going back into it, setting up the perimeter. Once we had established, and I'm sorry, I'm losing it.
So established security perimeter. So James, one of the reasons why James and I work so well together is because he was the implementation technology and hardware guy, and I was kind of the sales guy behind this. I do mostly application implementation, so James is the hardware. So when we first started working together, one of the things we really started focusing on was kind of the infrastructure side of this. So this is not a new diagram. This is basically Azure's best practice documentation when it comes to what your perimeter should look like. This is not unique or specific to Azure. It happens in AWS if you're using cloud services. It happens in Google services as well. If you're doing an on-prem environment or if you're doing a hybrid environment. These are all things that are very, very common to most everyone here that have done this for a long, long time.
So anyway, the reason JR brings this up is, like I say, we spend so much money on actually setting up these perimeters, training, basically all types of monitoring, whatnot. We have some certifications that, of course, our company and people we've worked for have attained. You spend all of that money to essentially set up this perimeter, kind of block access to data, but there's one specific department that you don't really think about, and they're so ever-reaching or far-reaching that it's kind of hard to keep everything in mind what they may ask you for, and that is your legal department.
So real quick, and I'll still slide from James for a second. So credit Microsoft where Microsoft is due. They talk about 3 pillars for cybersecurity, talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. From the legal perspective, when we talk and we advise legal counsel and internal providers or organizations, they're talking about the confidentiality. So a lot of stuff is passed through under the guise of privilege. So your legal counsel gets to do a lot of things because under privilege they should be able to receive and review data. Integrity, obviously from a cybersecurity perspective, those of us in the room that do those kind of things are looking to make sure the data is backed up and protected at all times. And availability, how do you get those end users to have this data for what they need it for? So that's kind of an overarching perspective that I think everyone in this room has, and so this isn't really necessarily new for this group, but things we just wanted to highlight again. So security frameworks, James, you want to touch any on this one?
So again, like I say, various frameworks for various types of data and various goals that you're trying to achieve, whether you're protecting data or you're transferring data or you're basically just proving to anyone you may be interacting that wants to know about your environment that yes, we're doing these things to keep our data safe. We're obviously handling the data in a safe way. We're keeping it backed up. We're obviously keeping the integrity and availability of the data to where it needs to be.
So a quick poll in the room, how many of you have worked through either accreditation for a SOC or an ISO compliance? Anybody? A chance? Okay. If you haven't, it becomes a checkbox exercise a lot of times. If you have an internal auditor or external auditor, really, you may have someone come in and look through all your controls and your procedures and your processes, and it happens to be a once-a-year thing. James and I are in the middle of a security audit right now for our own environment, and so these become checkbox items. And a lot of times we don't dive deeper into what these things mean and what really happens behind the scenes. But when we talk about the NIST frameworks, bless you. When we talk about, bless you again. When we talk about the NIST frameworks, NIST is really interesting, and I'll just mention a couple things real quick. All the NIST frameworks are very specific towards a specific type of data infiltration. Talks a lot about how to protect things. When we talk about AI risk management, we promised ourselves in this talk we wouldn't talk about generative AI. So I went ahead and used generative AI to develop the slides. That was easier than talking about it. But I want to mention that there are so many new frameworks that talk about where your data sits, and it's almost impossible to know all the frameworks. So if you're familiar with SOC and ISO and FedRAMP and high trust and all these different things, and processing data and checking credit card transactions, if your organization is doing these kind of things and you're not adhering to a framework, glad you're here to learn about a framework, do those things. If you are adhering to a framework, look outside of what else is available to you. And then James has a couple things real quick to talk about.
All right, so this is actually the stuff I know, so this is good. I'm sorry. Anyway, so the reason we show this slide is obviously we're trying to establish zero trust with all of our systems and wherever it is we're storing data. So how many people in the room here would know how to pull data from each one of these items here on the perimeter? So that being said, as a forensics investigator, I have had to pull data from every single one of these. We've learned through the years, obviously, getting access to a lot of this, most organizations don't have set up in advance. So what ends up happening is they're either handing over, I guess they're giving you too much permissions, they're giving you too much permission to access all of these devices or whatnot, just to get a small chunk of data that is irrelevant to the whole system.
Yeah. So kind of along this line as well, when you're talking about your legal counsel, if you work for an organization that has an external legal counsel or internal legal counsel, there's really two parts, and that's what I want to talk about real quick. So you usually have a general counsel that's inside your organization, and they usually don't have a seat at your table when it comes to security. You may have your information security, you have your CISO, you have your CIO, you have your CEO, you have a board of trustees, you have a security department, and usually there's someone from legal that should be looped in and usually isn't looped in. And the reason why is they serve a different function, and they have usually a different role in your organization. This isn't necessarily a blanket statement across everybody. Maturity levels are varying across organizations, but you may hear things like your chief legal officer, your deputy general counsel, your chief intellectual property counsel, your assistant general counsel or associate general counsel, your legal directors, and your civil legal counsels. So in most organizations, there is a general counsel. That general counsel has a few paralegals and may have some legal assistants and some other roles. And then what happens is you have external counsel. You have an outside counsel that really advises your organization to do all these things, and they're the ones that are going to ask for a whole bunch of data for different purposes. So why do we come and talk about a security conference about legal is because that data gets exfiltrated out through a very insecure means. And this is what we've seen over the years. So let me walk you through this. Has anyone ever heard of the EDRM in this room by chance? Okay, cool, I've got a couple people, excellent. So the EDRM essentially is what we in eDiscovery live by. This is kind of our bread and butter, what we look at all the time. Most IT and security folks we talk to have never heard of the DRM. But this is the process in which we do litigation and legal services. This is the process in which we identify, we preserve, we collect, we review, and we process data. And I'm going to give a little bit of definition of each one of these things mean. On the far left, we have our GRM. This is the Information Governance Reference Model. That model essentially is what you do every day protecting the data you have in-house. That's the data that you do your perimeter around, you keep, you secure, do all that stuff. The minute you're in litigation, that data gets subject to the DRM. So what that means is we identify, what data is possibly available for us. So this is our custodians, our users, our CEO, our SharePoint sites, all that fun stuff. Then we have preservation. Keep everything in place. We have to hold everything there. Then we collect. Collections is a big, scary word. Forensic examiners, third-party consultants, other people coming into your environment, collecting data out. If you have a sophisticated IT group, they may be able to pull data out themselves. They may say they know how to do this. That may lead into other problems as well. And then you have processing. This is not the same type of processing for GDPR. This is not the same type of processing for financial institutions, like when you do high trust or do other regulatory requirements. This essentially is taking data out of data. So in eDiscovery, what we do is we take an index and we use tools to take out metadata, give a unique file name, we dedupe, we denist, so we remove duplicates, and then we take extracted text and our OCR and dump this all into a structured database. So from an IT security perspective, let's kind of go through that real quick. All my data is out in my environment. I have all this different data that's going to be sitting around in my file servers, my email, my Teams, my Slack, all these other things. And someone outside my organization is going to now compile it all, put it into one location, and have it all indexed and searchable. And that's not a security concern for anybody. So that should be a security concern for a lot of people. Then we have our review and analysis where we're using tools like LLMs, or we're using generative AI to do summarizations, and all these other things. And the worst part is, not the worst part, but one of the things is all this data gets sent out to your external counsel. So kind of going back through this, the EGRM, I kind of want to go through this, but I kind of want to stop and take a quick pause there for a second. Yep. So, James, you want to add anything there? Okay, cool. So legal process, these requests, these are kind of fun. I'm going to go through this workflow kind of quickly, but I don't mind if anyone stops and asks questions. So when a legal request comes in, it usually comes through your general counsel. Your general counsel goes to IT, and it may go to your CIO or CISO, and at that point, they make a recommendation to pull data from that. So internally, your IT team may go through and say, okay, let me get the email. Let me get your team's information. Let me get your Slack information, those things. And they'll give it out to you in whatever format they can. Now, they may not be able to. You may have the same guy running your IT that also runs your credential and identity management, maybe the same guy running your backups and your server patches, maybe the same guy that's handling your server perimeter and your Wi-Fi. Depending on the size of your organization, you've got 1, 2, 3 people that are doing all these different roles. In a very large organization, you may have stacks of people doing these things, and they still don't understand necessarily what outside counsel is asking for. So what happens is we start spending a bunch of money doing those things. If you use an outside vendor collecting data, we'll go through some of the information of what the pitfalls we've seen with using vendors that haven't been vetted. All this goes down to is how well do you know your external counsel and who they're using as well. So when that happens, let me tell you a little bit about what Protiviti does. So part of Protiviti's service offering is we handle e-discovery matters for large cases. We handle for small cases. We handle for all kinds of different organizations, but we have our own environment in which we host tools and we take data out of your environment and host them for legal review. So at some point, your external counsel goes out and hires Protiviti, but you've never heard of Protiviti. You're just working with XYZ law firm. So you trust that your general counsel knows that your external counsel knows that we're good vendors. So I would love to say that this isn't a sales pitch, because it's not, but you should know who your outside counsel is using as their vendor. You should understand where your data sits. There's an interesting thing that happened with Azure and Purview. For those of you who ever used Microsoft Purview, there was an issue that when you created a case using advanced e-discovery, you could essentially make a backup of all your data, and it goes into a different data center in the Azure stack. Well, this actually happened, and it's pretty well documented and not knocked to Microsoft, but the Canadian government was using Purview to handle all domestic cases within Canada. But their data was being backed up to US soil. So it left the jurisdiction. Now, this wasn't a design flaw by the Canadian government. It was how Microsoft was handling Purview and placing data in a different foreign soil. So that was an issue. So understanding where your data exists and where it's going to is super, super important. Understanding that your vendor may use a SaaS product. So let's think about our data for a second. Our data exists in our network, goes to our external counsel, goes to external vendor, and that vendor may use a SaaS product that has another vendor using it as well. When a Microsoft outage happens, or an Azure or AWS outage happens, and they're using a SaaS product, your data now is compromised in a whole different way. So things to think about. After this, your vendor may have a sub-vendor. So I'll pause for a second here. One of the services that we offer internally is we do what's called bibliographic coding. This is a fancy way of saying data entry. So remember back, for those of us old enough, when we used to do credit card applications by hand, you'd walk through the mall and someone would say, hey, there's a Southwest card, do you want to apply for it? You get 10,000 points and a free flight to Jamaica or something like this. And so you would fill out a credit card application. Well, my first job when I was 16, I worked for a company called Datamart. And at Datamart, I just sat there all night and I inputted credit card applications. And that was hard copy Social Security numbers going into a database somewhere. That was my first job as a 16-year-old kid. Why anyone thought a 16-year-old kid should be able to see everyone's Social Security numbers, I don't know. That was my job. So that kind of work still happens all the time. We still do coding like this all the time. So a lot of times companies like Iron Mountain will be sitting on boxes for years and years and years. I've got one client right now with 15,000 boxes over 25 years. And they want to digitize all of it. So cool, we can do that, no problem. But there's data they want to pull off of it, so someone actually has to look at it. A lot of the vendors that we work with will offer two options, domestic or foreign, offshore. So all of a sudden, we have a client saying, hey, I want to code, I want to extract data, but I'm using this vendor, it's got great rate, charging me half a cent per page. That's amazing per field. And I asked the question, where's your data? And they go, oh, Pakistan. I said, oh, that's fun, that's neat. So we're sending all our images over to a different soil that you don't understand. They're like, no, but they're VPNing into our network from Pakistan. That's okay though, right? So when you think about these things, understanding your vendors and your sub-vendors and your sub-processors is incredibly important. Okay, I'll hang out for a second. Questions, comments, concerns there? Didn't think so. Yeah, go for it. Thank you, I think so. Not at all. Absolutely not. So there are tons of vendors, Big Four, Deloitte, KPMG, EY, all these PwC, lots of different vendors out there. There's been a consolidation in the marketplace of a lot of smaller vendors that do these kind of things, and they've consolidated really well. But there are plenty of vendors, both foreign, domestic. This is a big issue in the UK as well with GDPR. Big issue with CCPA out of California, dealing with foreign souls in Brazil, all kinds of fun stuff. Yes. Right. So the point of our discussion really is not so much to say, hey, higher productivity. It's really talking about what you should look out for if you're responsible for the security of your organization and your data sets. So let's talk about Apple versus Samsung. This is probably my favorite case of all time. So if you didn't realize, the beginning days of mobile devices, there was a lot of different lawsuits versus Apple versus Samsung. Lots of pinch to zoom and using touch screens and all kinds of different things. I posted these links, and hopefully this gets shared out a little bit. But this is just the general Wikipedia article about the 11 different lawsuits that went back and forth between both organizations. We're going to show some interesting statistics about this as well. Some of our competitors, colleagues, other folks in the industry, Logical, actually did a really interesting write-up on this. And I'll go through this, and I'm sorry I'm not letting James talk too much, but I just want to go through this real quick. This is probably my favorite slide. $13.1 million were spent alone by Samsung for this litigation. So if you have fiduciary responsibility to your organization and you're thinking about this, your e-discovery vendor is incredibly expensive. This is 13.1. So earlier today we were going through this. This is 2012. So put that in for inflation, 37%. You're looking somewhere around $18 to $20 million was spent just on the discovery. Okay. 11.1 number of, those are the number of documents. 11.1 million records or documents were submitted from Samsung to the e-discovery council that equated to 3.6 terabytes of data. So data has ballooned out. Let me give you a perspective. We process internally in our environment 3 terabytes a month, easily. So we sit on roughly a petabyte of data for other clients. It kind of freaks me out a little bit, but that's what we do. So of those, 880,000 documents were actually submitted from Samsung into Apple, and that was about 8% of the total document population, so it was a whole bunch of data. Then you've got number of pages, 8 million pages. I think the largest single case that James and I have worked on was something around almost 500 million pages. It was 500 million plus pages in a single case. Samsung only was seeking $262,000 back from this litigation with Apple. And I think my favorite one, and this is not knocking law firms, because obviously our attorneys are definitely important in the world, but Quinn Emanuel Associates charged roughly in 2012 $448 per hour for one of these litigations. So I've had the chance to work on several litigations in the Houston area. I moved to Houston for oil and gas. It's a pretty good market. And there's lots of lawsuits and lots of these things. So the reason why we mention this is because not only do you have a cost and fiduciary responsibility, you have a risk factor as well as far as this data being exfiltrated and going out. All right, so I'll kind of close up there. So talking about what's required, if you have not worked through the actual discovery process for your organization and you're called upon to submit data, I'd like to at least explain to you what is usually required. All of the SEC, the EPA, the DOJ, the FTC's requirements for e-discovery exchange protocols are actually publicly available online. And what they provide for you is essentially a control number, all the metadata associated to a record, the author, the from, the to, the CC, the BCC, extracted text, metadata, all these things, dates are all centralized into a single repository. And those are exchanged in almost every single trial and case as part of discovery. If you're dealing with smaller sets of data, like family law, those kind of things, it's not usually as the same type of requirements. But this essentially is what is exchanged when you're talking about what you're providing to the government or to opposing counsel. These are basically protocols that we send all the time. So I'll kind of stop there, turn time over to James, and we'll just talk about some real world stories as we're going through. James?
Yep, so I wanted to just kind of share some stories of experiences that we've gone through in collecting from all types of organizations. And again, just something for you to keep in mind. You may not have thought about it now, but you may be one day asked to assist with one of these collections. So the big one that we're currently seeing right now, and I still see it today, obviously, is Purview, Microsoft M365 Purview, and we're still seeing a lot of people who don't really understand Purview. So when we're asked to either collect, OneDrive, obviously email, Teams, anything in the M365 stack, we basically go to their IT department and we're telling them what we need. I guess they're not really understanding the ask, and they're ending up giving us global administration on their M365 accounts. So that's great. That gets us everything we need, but we can also see at that point everything. We can change everything. There are certain roles within M365 that you want to be aware of, because that's what you really should be limiting them to. In our case, it's usually the e-discovery module within Purview. So if you really want a vendor to only see what they create and what they should be seeing, it's really a role way down there, which is just e-discovery manager. There's even a role above that, e-discovery administrator, which we get a lot also as well, but that will actually give you access to all cases underneath the e-discovery part of Purview. So if you have if you have multiple vendors that are in your M365 environment, and you give e-discovery administrator, well, now we can see everyone else's cases.
So going back to that for a second too, we create these roles for vendors in 365, and I'm not knocking Microsoft, we're just using this as a case point that we're seeing a lot. In your normal day-to-day routines, as far as identity management and credentials, you may not think of these external vendors as credentials that you should be reviewing. They may not be part of your audit log. They may not be part of your 365 stack for roles. And so these people may not even exist anymore, the organizations they started with, and they still have access. There's one client that we did business with, and they're actually in this war story list that we did a collection for 2 years ago. I still have access to their Box account. Why do I still have access to their Box account? And I sent an email to their IT department going, you need to get rid of this. And they said, sure, no response. Still have access. Creeps me out. So the only way I could do is I basically changed my own password and threw away the password. So I kind of blocked myself out of that one. So indexing in place. This is actually it was actually right. Next
That's
story.
actually.
So what if you don't run 365? What if you don't run AWS? What if these aren't the environments you're dealing with? Maybe you're a dispersed organization that have things in Google Vault, or in Slack, or in Dropbox, or Box, or some other file storage system. There are tools in place, and I'll just mention a couple, like OpenText has a tool in place that you can collect data from multiple sources. Purview does this as well through Microsoft. There's a company called NetGovern. LiveEDA does another tool like this. There's lots of different tools that will do this. And what they do is they have credential connectors through APIs to your different environments, and they can pull data down into a centralized repository. So again, now you're going through multiple different organizations, multiple different operating systems, or operation level entities, and you're downloading data into this environment, and it's completely searchable and completely available. So one of the things that has given me the willies for years, as we've gone through DEF CON and through Black Hat and through different topics, is the fact that no one really talks about the data sitting out in legal. Law firms are incredibly susceptible to breaches. First thing I started off the talk was, our law firm didn't understand where their data was even sitting at, let alone how to protect it. So we'll go through a couple other things. But that indexing in place still happens, and that's part of a legal function, and they still do this all the time. And then when you talk about data destruction at the end of the case, that's a whole bunch of data that's just sitting in some vendor's exchange or in their environment that may or may not be deleted when they need to.
So indexing in place is also another one, like I said, to be careful with. Because we're asking for a lot of data that may be in separate parts of, again, like a box, we may want 4 or 5 users, I guess, personal folders. And we still have a lot of IT guys that says, well, I don't want to give you 4 logins, so here, just use my login. And again, that is actually one of the ones where
that was my favorite one.
Yes.
That was my favorite one. We had a list of 65 custodians, and they said, just here, take an admin login and just get what you need. And then we also found out that all their IT backups were stored in Box, and it was 350 terabytes of data that we indexed. We didn't need it, but that was the solution they gave us, and that's the kind of stuff that really kind of worries us. That one's all yours.
So going into emails, this is a fun story. So you also want to make sure your vendor and whoever, if they're not doing forensics in-house, you want to make sure whoever they're using for forensics knows exactly what they're doing. Case in point, we got brought in by a client who had contracted someone to just do a simple email collection. Their vendor came in and they did the collection, but they did it all with POP3. So
I'm going to pause for dramatic effect. If you've not, okay, my friend over here, if you're pulling data from POP3, what happens? What's that? It's open text. Yeah, it's all encrypted, but the best part about it is we deleted it. We deleted
popped
all
off the stack,
yeah,
yes.
The vendor deleted everything from the CEO's mailbox.
They technically didn't delete it.
Oh, they downloaded it.
Downloaded all the email, put the read record on it. So of course the mailbox, or that person, the custodian's mailbox is like, all right, well, everything's read. There's nothing to keep in this mailbox anymore.
So not only did they have spoliation in legal matters because now everything is marked as red, they have spoliation. They download all the data. CEO's freaking out because the data is not on the server anymore. And so they called us and said, can you help us put it back? I said, yeah, but guess what? It's a whole metadata's all changed. So vet your vendors as well. Password sharing, I don't think we have to talk about this. I think everyone knows password sharing bad. I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, but password sharing for sure is kind of a thing that still happens a lot. We had a small law firm says there's only 3 partners here. Can you just give us 1 credential so we don't have to pay for 1 license to your application? So don't share passwords. I think we know that one. We still have tons of oil and gas litigation that we have attorneys that request paper. We still run paper shops. And so I had a great attorney a couple months ago that said, hey, we know this litigation's coming up. I don't really like reading my screen. Can you print me out binders? So we did 10 3-inch binders, and they had 10 associates. So we did 10 binders times 10, and we're wheeling them down the street in Houston, just hoping it wasn't a gust of wind. It's a lot, yeah, I know. And in media encryption, do you want to talk about this one?
So media encryption, another one of my favorites. So thinking back probably about 11, 12 years ago, there wasn't really an easy way to encrypt everything. I think at that point we were using TrueCrypt, there you go. So we were using TrueCrypt. The problem with that is whenever we started taking it out to clients, they didn't know what to do with it. So like, I have to install this application and then I have to type in this long key. Like, yeah, I don't want to do this. So once BitLocker came out, obviously that was our go-to. We really pushed, and actually when we got acquired, it became a requirement. But one thing that we'll always push with our clients is encrypted delivery of data. So whether this is a physical hard drive, a flash drive, anything, we always push for it to be encrypted. My favorite situation is when we get a project out the door and then an hour later we get a call saying, hey, this is great, thanks for getting it to me, but I can't open this.
Yeah, I had a collection a couple weeks ago in New York, a black bag kind of operation. A law firm called me up and says, we need to collect the data overnight. Go, fly out to New York, Pelican case in hand, go to the client's office, get the cell phone, we collect the cell phone, collect laptop, do all these things. We're good to go. Get everything on a hard drive, BitLocker, AES 256 encryption, everything's done, sent to the law firm. Law firm goes, great, we have it, awesome, can't open it. Like, okay, fantastic. Okay, what's going on? You know, we sent you the password under a different cover, here's the information, here's everything you got. Yeah, we're using all Mac OS. And I said, great, BitLocker isn't super fun with Mac OS. So, I love people that are laughing in the audience because we've dealt with this. And they tell us, hey, well, can you just go ahead and send me a non-BitLocker drive so that we can open it? Oh, and by the way, I can't open your forensic tools on Mac OS, but our entire law firm is Mac OS. Can you go ahead and just print everything to PDF, put them in non-encrypted PDFs, and put them on the hard drive, and can you go ahead and use it via FedEx? And I'm like, no, please don't do this. But that's the kind of stuff that outside counsel is representing an internal entity, and that internal entity, general counsel, has no idea, and all of you fine people are doing so much to protect your environments, and you have no idea what's going on outside of that. So it's something that just happens a lot, and it scares us. So that's why I bring it up. So what's the solution behind this? There's only a problem if you have a solution for it, right? So again, one of our favorite things is, again, James and I work in cybersecurity because we defend and protect kind of blue and purple, our own internal networks. We have a larger organization within Protiviti that handles our security practices, and then we have a larger one with our parent company and do all kinds of fun things, but we manage our environment, which is why we have our own SOC controls. But we like to come to conferences that aren't in legal to evangelize people that aren't in legal. I was sitting at a cybersecurity conference a couple years ago in Anaheim, and it was a bunch of CISOs in the room and a bunch of security professionals, and they were like, we need more budget for security. Yeah, we need more budget for monitoring. Yeah, our SIEM's weak. Yeah. And I kind of raised my hand and said, is there anybody in here from risk or compliance? Is there anybody in here from, I don't know, decision makers that are going to be able to actually pay for this stuff? Is there a CEO here? Is there anyone else? We tend to go to these conferences over and over again and evangelize to each other. And we say, man, I really want to buy this tool. And we go back to our shareholders and say, we need to buy this tool. And they go, show me the ROI behind it. So our big thing is, if you can, attend other conferences. I recently spoke and gave kind of a talk about this at an internal audit. Our IAFA practice out of Dallas invited me to go speak to their financial auditors. And all of a sudden, all these internal auditors come to me going, this is so cool. How can I get this information? Because for internal audit, I need to know where this data is. And IT says, I can't have it. So there's a dialogue here. So go network with other people within your organization. Talk to them, have fun, attend other conferences. If there's no budget for it, talk and find free conferences. Legal strategy, solution strategy, and tabletops. So if you've worked in cybersecurity long enough, you probably have done a tabletop or two. You've probably done disaster recovery. You've probably done business continuity. You probably had, what happens if a meteor hits Houston? Well, our data's in Dallas and this kind of stuff. What happens if you're sued? We talk about incident response if there's a breach. What happens if there's a huge lawsuit? What happens if our lead engineer leaves and takes intellectual property? Are you prepared to how that litigation works and how that data needs to be defended?
What does it look like to get to that data? What does it look like to hand that data off?
Yeah, what is your legal strategy when you have to turn over the keys and you've just migrated everything into one environment or multiple dispersed environments? Our favorite is mergers and acquisitions. What happens when your company acquires a company and they have their own data stack and their own security? And then that has to go through legal review and contract review management. And that leads me to the next thing. We just did an engagement recently that we were called upon through our internal audit practice as well to help do procurement review of contracts on MSAs and SOWs. And the reason why is procurement signs agreements with people that are touching your data and there's no requirement in their contract for any kind of security standards. So this was a county, I can't say which county it is, but it was a county in the US and they were going through and they had one IT guy who was a CISO and who was like their all be all end all, and he was retiring in 4 days. And we asked him for any documentation he had on how security was being vetted through procurement, and he goes, it's all up here. And I go, you're retiring 4 days? He goes, yep. And I was like, okay. So that's just kind of what happens. So a lot of times, procurement doesn't realize that there should be standards as far as what their vendors are doing and where their data are sitting. So educating procurement, educating these departments are doing those things. And then reviewing their MSAs and SOWs with your vendors as well. Create a standing committee for legal review. We may have some for policies and procedures for internal security. Invite someone from legal once in a while. We were just on a call yesterday with a team from a bank and financial institution. They've done this huge, and actually some of my colleagues here were actually working on this project. And they've been doing a ton of work with this bank, and we've been implementing Microsoft Purview and doing identity management, doing all these other things. And legal gets on board and says, we haven't talked to anybody in IT. We've just been figuring out what permissions we have and downloading data and playing with it in our own world. And we're starting to send it out to other people, and we're just like, there's rules. There's information you can glean from this stuff.
Also setting the expectation with legal, because sometimes they ask for just the wildest, craziest things that you know is not possible, but they think it should be easy.
Can I export out 5 terabytes of emails and have it ready for Monday? No, you can't. No. Can you send me a 60 gig, or what was it? Someone asked me the other day for like a 10 terabyte flash drive, and I was like, no.
Right, yeah, so set the expectation so they know what to expect, and yeah, they're not gonna come asking. And the 5 terabyte overnight request was definitely a thing that happened. And
happens a lot, happens more than I care to admit. And then you should definitely, and this is the whole purpose of this talk, if you are not looking at your external vendors and looking at your external counsel or outside counsel as a vendor, they're a vendor. Man, they're a vendor. They're a vendor that has a sub-vendor and sub-processors, and they may push vendor data out, and they definitely need to be reviewed as part of your internal audits on a yearly basis. So a couple last things, we're running kind of slow on time. Some stats, I just thought this was cool from Arctic Wolf. They put this stat out a couple years ago, and essentially only 26% of law firms believe their firm is very prepared to respond to cyber incidences. So for those of us that work in the consultancy world, law firms are getting hit, man. They're getting hit. We won't mention law firms by name with the MOVEit breach. MOVEit, there were law firms that were using it to move client data, and that was a very public breach. Dropbox has been breached, all kinds of different things have been breached. So law firms are very much susceptible, and it's gonna get worse. The other thing, just real quick side story, if your external counsel sends an email to general counsel requesting data and they send it to IT, IT sees general counsel, my internal team, asking me for data. Nobody has validated that external counsel is the real people. Okay, so within some of our stacks, we send out backups of cases when they're old, and in that backup, in plain text in an XML file, is every user that's ever logged into that case with their name and email address in plain text. So if you get that from another vendor, I can see every single person that's ever logged in, and I can pretend to be outside counsel from XYZ law firm, and then ask your internal counsel for data, and the request for data came in from your general counsel. So it's really easy to get data out. I'm just waiting for this to kind of blow up one day, and social engineers to realize how easy this data is to get out. 65% of 60% of firms identify the sophistication level of threats and attacks as the biggest challenge, so it's pretty small. And again, the average ransomware now is down to about $1 million. For law firms that are billing out $480 for junior associates, $1 million is not a lot of money. That's a real quick turnaround. So that's it. That's our talk. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I'm James. JR, he's James. And appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
awesome, thank you.
Oh, it happens all the time. Happens all the time, especially if law firms don't have a good relationship with IT, they'll give you permission to do it using forensic tools and not going through IT. So for instance, if you're hosting, we had a client the other day that, well, if they're hosting their environment in someone else's server, so for instance, someone was using Rackspace, still, they're using Rackspace and they're like, hey, this is an individual user, not an IT managed environment. Here's our credentials, pull data for us. Yeah, F-Response does that really well in case.
Or just, I mean, smaller organizations
Yeah.
that don't want to spend on like M365 or something like that. They're going to go with the low cost, you know.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So MDL's multi-district litigation happens all the time, and so when that stuff crosses borders, so when we have internal security audits and they say, do you carry any EU data? We go, yes. I have no idea if we do or not, we just say yes. Because we're collecting source data. So if he and I have ever emailed anyone in the EU, it's GDPR related. So yes, jurisdiction plays a huge issue into that. There's a really fine line between e-discovery vendors and are we processors or are we custodians? Technically, the law firm is the custodian because they're the ones that take possession of the data, but it's on our environment, so we're custodians. We don't process by the financial definition of processing, like credit cards, but we still have, yeah, it's an ugly discussion. And nobody wants to talk about it, yeah. I don't, John, anything else? Yep. Yeah, if you want to add, that's a great comment. And legal tends to get a, yeah. Yeah. And legal tends to be the get out jail free card, yeah. They get the free pass on all those things. Sorry, do you have a question as well? So for the most part, I can't speak for everything. I would say 90% of our clients, people we've worked with a law firm, but our portfolio is really split between law firm and enterprise. So we work either directly with general counsel and enterprise clients, or we work with law firms. 90% are using some type of MFA, which is fantastic. Physical tokens kind of went out. I mean, so if you talk about your phone using Duo or using Okta, those kind of things, that does happen. We enforce that in our environments, but it's not a requirement, and a lot of people don't do that. So
It's really just up to the maturity level of the vendor that they're using for wherever that data is going. So if they're in a review platform, if that vendor hasn't set up MFA, then you're only using passwords.
And those passwords are usually stored locally on applications, and they're not usually being done through an identity manager or SSO, so that's an issue as well. I think we're about time, so appreciate it. Thanks again. We'll be around, so thanks, everybody.